Welcome into the Astrology of 2025. My name is Gracey with Northern Astrology. I will be your host through this panel of brilliant astrologers that I have gathered from all over the place to join us to have this conversation about the historic and quite groundbreaking astrology of the year ahead. So, January 1st, kicking off the nodes being at 0 degrees Aries and 0 degrees Libra, which means it's a fresh start for all of us. And we will go from January 1st until the end of March in the first quarter, and then it'll be broken up in 3-month segments from there. So I am very excited to bring you this project. It's been a little bit in the making for a while, so it is something that I look forward to bringing you and letting you guys get to know the other astrologers. We've got Alessia from Life Through Spirit, Jamal, the Night of Sages, and we have Amanda from Astro Healing Council, and then of course yours truly. I will be joining them to kind of moderate and help paint the picture of what we're going to be seeing for the times ahead. And I really like to be able to showcase what people are going to be experiencing through a visual type of workbook of sorts. So luckily for you, we have also curated a book that is available on Amazon and also my website in the ebook form for you guys to experience this fever dream of a year ahead. So I am very excited to bring this to you. And without further ado, the Astrology of 2025. Cool. All right. February 2025, we have kind of a preview thanks to Amanda's insight on the February 1st conjunctions. And can you explain that just a little bit more, like how people can really take advantage of that? Because I know you just did, but like when you're looking at the astrology of February in general, we're kind of looking at things starting to really lock in for other people. And I feel like that very first of the month thing is something that we can tune into more.
Yeah, Venus is about receptive energy. So if you want to look at it on a really wide scale with nothing specific, it's just sort of how you are dealing with your receptiveness. Are you to a point where it's easy to deceive you? Are you to a point where you're channeling your receptiveness to something creative? Are you, what else can we do here? It's also the North Node. So am I in alignment with what I'm meant to be doing with my Venus energy? Because there's a right way and there's a wrong way to experience the energy of Venus. And by that, I mean, no judgment, but, when Venus is a very strong energy with its power of being receptive, and that can always be taken advantage of. Women get taken advantage of for that just naturally. That's our nature, to be receptive. So we have to also learn to protect ourselves. So I feel like this pre-shadow starting in Pisces, moving over Neptune, entering Aries, part of that story is like, am I doing the right thing for myself? Or am I being too giving? Am I being too receptive? Do I need to have more discernment? Neptune can show us where we are a little bit delulu. I have Neptune conjunct my sun, so I can speak on that. But yeah, if you're doing a fun artistic project at this time, it's probably going to be awesome.
I love that because it's right before Venus goes into Aries. So this is like this last push of, okay, Venus is direct. We have this forward motion with Venus, and Jupiter will also be direct on the 4th of February. So that last final kind of moment to tap into that artistic creativity as well as the depths of your emotions. This is, to me, a great time to be doing shadow work if you wanted to tap into it and really dive in. When Mars is stationed retrograde, the more that you can go into yourself in a healthy fashion. There is some things as too much self reflection, and sometimes you can just start being too self-aware and being a little bit too hypercritical, and that's where you can be a victim of your own deep dives, which is very common with Pisces. So be careful of doing that. But I think that like fire starter energy of Venus and Aries, like I know that in the workbook, the immediate thing that I wanted to put in was just this bold red colors, and it's so strong. And we're going to see, with Mars station retrograde, it might not be as intense. Or how are you guys feeling that with Mars being retrograde at this point?
Well, so whenever Venus and Mars are in aspect, in my opinion, I feel like that's usually, I don't want to say prime time for relationships, but that's a lot of what you'll see or what you're going to hear. Venus Mars aspects, whether it's the trine, the opposition, the square, usually there's some kind of, relationship happening during that time. And I think the trine is a little more, obviously it's going to sound harmonious, right? Because everyone thinks trine means harmony, and it can certainly be that, but there's also the sense that sometimes with trines, things are kind of baked in. It's already kind of all ongoing, or it's hard to separate the influence of the two. So Venus and Pisces, it's like there's beauty to be found in everything. Or Venus likes to harmonize kind of even with things that seem, over idealized, so to speak. And then here comes Mars in Cancer, which again, it's not flowing. It's a little inconsistent. It's emotionally driven. So that's kind of baked into this divine love or inspirational love or, kind of thing, because that's what people think about Venus and Pisces. It's love that's inspirational. And it certainly can be. But here comes Mars in Cancer, which is kind of like not really on the same wavelength, really. It's more of an emotional outburst or response to something. And then usually with Mars in Cancer, there's this sense of feeling like pent up, if that makes sense, or not like Capricorn, where it's like it's long and drawn out, but it's almost like Cancer, I wouldn't say wants freedom, but Jupiter in Cancer, for example, that's like a freedom loving energy. So it's like Mars in Cancer is like, I'm being restrained. Okay, I need to break through this. Or my needs are not being met. Okay, I need to overcome this somehow. And then it's back to uncoordinated, not strategized action. So with Venus and Mars in a trine, I would say it's prime time for relationships. But the thing about it is with the retrograde energy, there could be this thing of acting on old desire is, my thing, or trying to regress to a relationship dynamic that for some reason maybe didn't come together previously, but now circumstances may seem right. And then you also have Neptune there. So logic is kind of not in the equation really at all.
Fully agree. The childlikeness of Venus and Aries too, and regressing maybe to those childlike tendencies with mother wounds is definitely going to be a theme with Mars retrograde in Cancer. I don't want to say that, you're going to have to face the things that you have to face within your mother, within yourself, but there are kind of like women, I feel like, have the ability to have that intuition and that like connection with the moon and lunar energy, whereas men are technically driven by the sun, and they wake up on new energy cycles every day, and it's like that might not feel like that's really accurate during this time. I feel like a lot of roles will feel a little bit blurry. Things could be, when Venus is in Aries, a lot more strength found in the divine feminine. And it might feel a little bit more attacky. I know there's a better word than attacky because that's not a word, but definitely aggressive and definitely kind of like tit for tat. Like you're going to feel there's a combativeness for sure.
Mars retrograde is also squaring Chiron at 19 degrees of Cancer in Aries. So, in the mix of all of this, we have an aspect from Chiron in Aries. So, there is an element of like, the self motivating, independent energy, the wound there, playing into this whole dynamic. So, February 3rd, we have Moon conjunct Chiron, 19 Aries, Moon square Mars, 19 Aries in Cancer, and then Mars square Chiron, 19 Aries, Cancer Aries. So February 3rd, if you have any degrees, 19 degrees in any of those signs, cardinal signs specifically, that could be really obvious in your life showing up.
Doesn't Venus also sextile Pluto around that time? I think the fourth.
Right, with
Yeah.
that ingress.
Yeah. So
And
I'm
with
also sorry.
Oh no, I was like, and with Jupiter being direct, it goes back to like all the Pisces placements being ruled by that Jupiter in Gemini, Jupiter not enjoying being in Gemini, and now it's direct. I feel like that's gonna kind of like release that hold, especially with Neptune and the North Node coming up right after that. So I'm definitely interested to see how that Jupiter stationing direct is going to be maybe bringing some like balancing energy back to the Piscean placements that have just been like, help.
Yeah, it's like going from drowning in information and you don't know what's what. You don't even know what to believe anymore because there's like you've been presented with both sides and now you're like, dude, I don't even know what to believe like at all. So especially with Neptune, in Jupiter's sign interacting with all this stuff. When the station's direct, I feel like it'll allow us more of maybe a path forward with what you're gonna believe. Like, okay, I've taken in all the information. What do I believe now? And thankfully, when Jupiter station is direct, it'll give you something to like show you the way a little bit.
I've been getting duped by like AI videos this whole time. I know that like they came out with a baby peacock thing that like got the internet all worked up because it was like a AI peacocks aren't that cute when they're born. And so AI made them think that they're these cute little adorable like tiny peacocks. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this is a great. But like it wasn't real. So I got by it. So I feel like maybe there'll be less misinformation. Is that kind of what I'm gathering here?
Less like the twin competition, the lookalike, is it? Yeah.
Oh my gosh, those have
Hey.
been wild.
Yeah, I feel like that might be not as prominent. But I was also curious about Venus and Aries and the sextile to Pluto, if anyone else feels like there might be some obsessive, extra passionate power play dynamics happening.
Ooh, I love
Oh,
that.
I wanted to actually, well, yes, to your question. I also think it's kind of interesting that like we always look for Venus and Jupiter in the sky, like are they aspecting each other? What are they doing independently? And people kind of always gauge that as a sense of like abundance. Like if Venus and Jupiter are doing this, abundance is possible. If they're not doing this, we're doomed for like the next 2 weeks or whatever, right? But it's interesting that Jupiter is stationing direct, which Amanda brought up, and then also like we have Venus moving slower. So Jupiter is kind of speeding up, and then Venus is going slower, and then there's the sextile to Pluto that it's going to kind of like station around and move back with. So I think again it kind of harbors back to with the Mars retrograde too. There's a sense of like intensity, of course, with Mars and Pluto, but especially Venus being ruled by Mars. And then I think the slowing down is kind of like us questioning, like, do I like intensity in my relationships, or how do I like to see that presented, or rethinking about how we act out in relationships when we don't get our way with Mars, right? Or you could also think about Venus Pluto as definitely, I would hate to say it's Beauty and the Beast, but it can be that as well. There's like the darker sides of all of our loving natures that's kind of brought out into the open when you have Venus and Pluto in an aspect. So it's the jealousy, the stalking, the possessiveness, and the third parties, and all of that, stuff that can kind of come into play. And you have this in the air and a fire variety. So this is not the self-preservative versus finances kind of dynamic. This is more of like that passion or inspiration kind of thing that comes together with only fire and air energy.
I was thinking inner child stuff too with Mars in the mix and Venus and Aries. Specifically when you said like not getting what you want, I think there might be more awareness around that inner child sort of either throwing a tantrum or maybe not even speaking up for wants and, asserting oneself and saying, hey, this is what I need.
I feel
And
like I
that, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
go ahead.
That's really a good point because the inner child is what is making the demands. And it's like when we don't feel heard, we don't feel seen, we don't feel understood naturally, like Chiron's like, yes, you understand this. You can really feel like even more of a victim of surrounding or circumstance, and you can just kind of get stuck in that energy of like, oh my God, this is going to be like this forever. So I really like how with Pluto, we have the ability to transform that. We do have an ability to get out of our attachment issues or whatever we got from childhood, abandonment. We have all the things that we can get from there, but Pluto does have the uncanny ability to make us rise out of that and make ourselves into something completely different.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
agree.
on a mundane level, Pluto and Aquarius, right, is like our whole new era coming in. And on a wide scale, we think of Cancer energy as the country, it's the population. So, it's the country, right? So when we have Mars retrograding there and, trouble with the patriotism that we feel as a country, there's so much turmoil going on. And then, the threat, quote unquote, depending on how you view it, of AI. Pluto and Aquarius can motivate us to make those big changes that we like. All of our values have changed. And so we might be realizing, like, hey, with the nodes here as well interacting, like, I've learned some new information. I have new values here, and I want to move differently, and I want to, do what's best for me in a new way. And just based on all the changes in the country and based on all the changes that we're experiencing as a whole, you know what I mean? Like the way that I've been doing my job or making money, I need to do it in a different way now. I need to now put what's important first, and how do I make that happen? Because Pluto will make it happen. Combining with all this other stuff, it's really great motivation to make those changes that you've needed to make for quite a while, and now you can.
And that's exactly where the Neptune ingress will happen too. So these things will be not only Venus and Aries sextile that Pluto and Aquarius, but also it'll eventually be Neptune when we get further into March. So that'll definitely be an interesting time. I feel like we're literally going over baby steps, what it feels like. And I know that's kind of astrology in general, but these themes and patterns are seeming to link together quite well. Because even going into the next big transit that we have for February with Neptune conjunct the North Node, we were even able to touch on that before with February 1st. It's like we're seeing the shifts, the changes, and I think the biggest theme for the 2025 being such a spiritual year and being based around breaking delusion and taking off the rose-colored glasses and seeing what's been all around you. Like these are very keyword themes of Neptune, yet it's important to see it because collectively I feel like we're going to be, unfortunately, what happens with Neptune is lied to. And we can have the wool pulled over our eyes very easily as a collective, and movements are big around this, as well as forces of nature. The Neptune in the final degrees of Pisces, especially conjunct the North Node, is reshaping a lot of water supply and what water is capable of, the activity of water, the activity below the surface. So having that happen and then going Neptune into Aries, I feel like that's, I know that Amanda's talked about this with the flooding, and we've talked about the forces of nature coming into play. But I feel like if February around this time with Neptune conjunct the North Node isn't like a weather breakthrough of some sort, so something happening around that, I really do think that there's going to be some, although it's middle of quote unquote winter, for most people, I do feel like that there's definitely going to be some big storms happening around that time, especially with that loosely making aspects to Pluto as it gets closer to Aries.
I was also thinking that there might be breakthroughs in terms of healing and like maybe art therapy as a form of healing, or perhaps maybe more attention around psychedelics or even cannabis towards healing, because we've seen that become bigger and bigger and people are becoming more receptive to it.
This is a good time to be like, disclaimer on Neptune conjunct the North Node, ease up on the psychedelics maybe this weekend, or go all in. Like there's only one way to be careful with them, but if you're trying to contact other realms, that would be a time to do that, just because I do think that you're right. Cannabis, psychedelics, huge themes around drugs with anything with Pisces, let alone Neptune in the North Node there. All right. Does anyone want to jump in with the Neptune conjunct North Node? I feel like we have kind of covered that one a little bit.
I am hesitant to say this, but I will. You can cut it if you want.
No.
Neptune and Pisces, I mean, I don't know if it's, I'm only saying this because of what I've seen, but I think of drag. I think of Neptune in Pisces as drag. And, there's been a lot of threats to that community lately. And so, yeah, I mean, in the same vein of like a drag queen is, dressed up in glam and looks beautiful, it's, they'll be the first ones to tell you like, yeah, it's all a lie, I'm a dude or whatever. But so that's the type of like deceit, quote unquote, that, people are debating or whatever. But there's needed deception, right? In glamour, like anytime you're doing a play, you have like the set, the lighting, you're making it look like something that it's not. So photography is another big thing with this. So those type of art forms where it's like based on lighting is very important, makeup is very important. Yeah, so drag is something that I always think about when I think of Neptune, especially in a mutable sign like Pisces.
I love that so much because any community that dares to be different and dares to stand outside of the box of norms that society throws at it does need protection. And there are people that unfortunately go through hell just to simply feel like they're able to express themselves. And that is not something that I feel like is taken lightly when you talk about Neptune, So I know that when you are talking about that, it's all love because these people, that's exactly what it is. It's love and it's about sharing yourself through those forms of expression. Like you said, there's all sorts of performances, there's all sorts of necessary deceptions where, I don't, put my bare face without any time to prep right on my YouTube channel. There's always levels of masking that we go through, and maybe people being revealed for who they really are for sure is a theme, absolutely, but also letting your true self shine in whatever fashion that is and being able to dress that up for yourself.
Absolutely. It's my favorite community, and I have so many friends that do drag. So, yeah, I hope all goes well in that realm. But there's certainly a lot of ways to express Neptune. Ultimately, sacrifice can be something else that is associated with Neptune. So, if there's something going on where you feel like you have to sacrifice something or you feel really pressured to sacrifice something, maybe just chill and don't make a decision on that day.
And it's all about feeling yourself in that energy because we're speaking once again on future transits, things that are happening in the future. We are only doing January, February, and March of this year in this form because we want to make sure that we condense it to where it's consumable and you can actually digest all this information. And it's not just, okay, this is your year ahead, buckle up, let's go. This is practical information tied in. So I really appreciate that. With the next big thing on the list for February, we have on the 12th the full moon in Leo at 24 degrees. And with the Astrology of 2025 workbook, there's detailed breakdowns of the moons and all the different things happening with the moon, not the moons, actually, yes, the plural moons that we experienced in 2024. That was a lot for everyone. But the moon and the lunations in general, and I think that full moon is going to be illuminating. That's a great time. I feel like you could perform. You could do some dressing up and getting out there with the sun being the ruler of that full moon. What are your thoughts?
Well, the full moon is square Uranus, so that automatically kind of always makes me think that there's going to be some kind of curveball thrown in the mix. And with Uranus, it's so hard to really predict what that will be, right? Because Uranus is very unpredictable. Uranus is like the destabilizer. I don't want to say prankster because it's more Gemini, but Uranus does kind of like to, oh, you have a plan? Well, let's actually take a detour from that. Now, on one end, Sun square Uranus, there can be disruptions, delays, or just again a detour to, let's say, asserting your solar energy or your outer personality or your reputation, so to speak. And then with the moon, there can be emotional changes or imbalances, instability around your mood as well, or just with the physical body. Now, the full moon in Leo makes me feel like, in a fixed energy, whatever we're accomplishing, having a culmination about around this period seems more permanent, especially because the sun, the moon, Mercury, Uranus are all in fixed signs. So it makes me think whatever we're kind of coming up with around this period, there is some sense of finality. It also makes me think back to, well, at this point, this will be 6 months prior when we were in Leo season and we had the full moon in Aquarius, which had the same signature of the sun and moon square Uranus at that time as well. So there could just be this sense that maybe plans that we set in motion shortly after or during that period have reached a culmination in spite of a detour, or maybe in a way that we did not previously expect. And I would say, lastly, there's likely that with Uranus and Taurus, there's a financial component. There's been some kind of financial change that has happened between August of 2024 and then by this point, February 2025. That would be like my best guess. There could even have been change in leadership, depending on, let's say, if this is in your 10th house, there could be a change in leadership. Let's say in the 4th house, change of residence, or something like that, that has led to some kind of culmination in that 6 month period. But again, maybe in a way that you didn't previously expect, or at the time you weren't thinking it was going to happen that way, or you thought it was going to happen one way and it unfolded in a completely different way.
I love that. And I think that's the part of the full moons and part of like what we're including with the rituals and the tarot pulls and all the things that we're doing in the workbook that can kind of help you break out of where that is in your chart, because there is a lot of insight from all of us on all of these pages, and it can kind of help illuminate, so to speak, where this is happening for you. So it's a very personal transit, and finding where these things are happening in your chart makes a huge difference. All right, so Mercury in Pisces on Valentine's Day, if you want to talk about yapping and or just emotional surges, I can't imagine. I believe if I am doing my math right, I will be on a beach at this point for the first time since like 2020. So I feel like I will be back in my natural element as a Mercury and Pisces native. What does everyone experience with this transit? Because I am just naturally here, just long-winded visualizations and daydreams. But how does everyone else experience this?
Well, my partner has Mercury in Pisces, and something that he does very well is rapping. He can freestyle pretty well. I've
That's
seen a
so
lot
cool.
of rappers, yeah, that can freestyle who have Mercury in Pisces. So, yeah, that's one I always think of with this transit.
I think of it like a bird's eye view almost. I know Mercury typically doesn't do well in Pisces, but where Mercury might be more detail oriented, I think Mercury in Pisces has such a gift. I could talk about this all the time because some of my favorite people have Mercury in
Yes.
Pisces or Mercury in Sag. And yeah, Mercury doesn't necessarily do well in both those signs, but they have this gift for the bird's eye view, for zooming out, whereas Mercury would like to be more meticulous, detail oriented, so creative, intuition on point. The way that they speak, Mercury and Pisces can sometimes be like even more poetic, or yeah, just like this almost very beautiful way of speaking, I find.
Jamal, would you like to share anything with that?
It's interesting that this particular Mercury transit will have that, let's like the mutual reception between Jupiter and Gemini. So it's like Mercury, like Alessia said, it's not that great necessarily in Pisces, but there is the square to Jupiter. So it's almost this sense that like Mercury and Jupiter, they're not necessarily trading places per se, but the square is productive or more productive for Mercury than it would be otherwise. Or at least I would say the only danger is, a lot of great ideas, inspired thinking, but not really grounding that into something that's tangible or, let's say, easy to receive on an intellectual level. And I think that's kind of the danger sometimes with Mercury and the Jupiter ruled signs. It's like, yes, this is super inspiring and creative, but it's like, can I duplicate this? Can I do this over and over and over again and do it the same exact way? Probably not.
Feasibility of Mercury and Pisces is not there. That's for sure. It's like, is this a consistent? Is this something I can do and like keep up with this? And it's usually like, no, but I'm going to try it anyways.
I think that's what's so great with it, though, and like the square to Jupiter and Gemini, throw spaghetti at the wall, see what sticks kind of vibe. And like the mutable nature of it as well is like, well, if you tried it and I'm okay to let it go if I don't want to move it forward anymore.
Yeah, letting go is a huge part of the process because that is part of the Piscean curse is being in a constant flow state, whether you want to be or not. And with Mercury being in Pisces on the 14th, and then we have the sun into Pisces on the 18th at 4:06 a.m. in my notes, if anyone wanted to know the exact time. That's Central Time. But, having Mercury in Pisces, the sun in Pisces, that's going to feel very much like we are all in a collective daydream. And then moving into the later part, we have Mars direct in Cancer on the 23rd, and then the new moon in Pisces on the 27th. So, not to get too far ahead, when the sun goes into Pisces, this is probably uncomfortable for a lot of the other mutable signs for obvious reasons of aspecting. But it's a good time, I feel like, to be more whimsical and be more mystical and really tap into that energy. So, Sun in Pisces, Mercury in Pisces at this point, going into Pisces season, we are getting into the very last part of the year with Mars stationing direct. How is this Pisces season going to feel differently than, I guess, last year? And I know I have no actual reference for that, like any transits from
Wasn't
last year. So it's
so
very much
that
a just think about it.
was the Sun and Mercury were together with Saturn, and I remember we had the Virgo full moon, but yeah, that was earlier this year. Well, no, that was after. Oh, well, only thing I really remember is like literally a month prior or like a few weeks before we found out about Trump kind of getting. I don't want to get political, but I remember it was like the pardoning or something about the January 6th thing. His kind of like he was let off the hook, and then it's
Yeah.
like, oh, he's gonna apply like to run for president again. Like that's kind of all I remember about that particular transit. But I do remember Mercury with the Sun and Saturn. It didn't feel like the best conversations were being had during that transit. It felt like the conversations were very like, I don't want to say dire, but like not positive, not like congratulations. Or it's like if it's a congratulations, it's like, yeah, you struggled for like 37 hours straight. So here you go, that's Mercury Saturn, or let's go and do this 6 hour long driving class and I will
Yeah,
be
because
your
that was
instructor today.
last
Like
year when Saturn went into Pisces, like March 7th, 2023.
yes,
Yeah.
yes.
So, and then Pluto was in like March 23rd, I think, 2023. So we had a lot of movement around that, like Pisces Aries season as always, but maybe that loomingness of Saturn into Pisces was kind of the vibe then. Now with so much Piscean energy already happening before Pisces season even starts, I'm wondering how Jupiter being direct will make that sun feel a little bit better, or then when Mars kicks in direct, like 5 days later, how that's going to feel collectively, because then we all have that collective reset of that new moon in Pisces on the 27th. So, with that being said, tapping into that Mars direct on the 23rd is being that next big transit with the sun in Pisces. If you guys do want to expand on that, feel free to. But that sun in Pisces will eventually try and Mars direct later on, but not so much because it will be moving forward and it'll just be a little bit slowly getting there. But energetically wise, the wateriness of Pisces season is going to be loud.
Yeah,
Well, I
I
think
feel, sorry, go ahead, Jamal.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was gonna say, well, I know like we have, let's say, Capricorn season, the Sun and Mars are opposite. Then Aquarius season, they're in conjunct. Then finally, here comes the trine, and it feels like, okay, finally, my ego or my outer personality or what I'm known or growing into feels like it's in step with the actions that I want to take, even if it's not that great in the sign of Cancer. Sun trine Mars is like a really good time for recognizing your desires, or it seems like the timing seems to finally kind of be aligned for action to kind of coincide. So I think that's a positive thing. And then I think one thing is obviously the last time we had Sun and Saturn and Pisces together was Jupiter was in Taurus at this time with Uranus as well. And we kind of have Jupiter without Uranus now. And then this time it's in a square with Saturn. So I think there is just this sense or this feeling that like it's a push and pull whenever Jupiter and Saturn are in square by sign, right? It's like it's up and down. It's not consistent. Progress can be made, but it has to be like very slowly implicated. There is a sense of like the past in the future, or let's say structures that are already set, Saturn, are kind of in a little bit of a conflict with this new perspective or perspective that we're trying to add in at the same point, because that's Jupiter Saturn together. It's like, okay, let's take this structure and let's expand it with this philosophy. So when they're in a square, it kind of feels like they're not quite, it's not quite happening so smoothly. So it's kind of a mixture of things going on. It's like, yeah, this is the time to take action, but be cautious because this may not just be a smooth sailing with what you're trying to take on during this period. But all the planets are direct, so forward movement can start happening. So it's kind of like, wait, and it's like Pisces almost. It's like, wait, I can take action. Wait, I can't. Or should I? Should I? So that's kind of what this gives me. It's like a push and pull kind of energy.
Yeah, Mars squaring Venus right before it stations direct. I mean, as Jamal was saying earlier, Mars and Venus aspecting can point to relationships or, opportunities or conflicts within those relationships. But then like stationing direct, we're facing things about those relationships, if not on a literal sense, like relationships between how you provide for yourself, to be quite honest. How are you, like, what's the balance between your because it's in Cancer, right? So Mars is like that emotional need for security, opposite to Capricorn. And then Venus, how am I going to receive that? So whatever we're dealing with in relationships at this time, or with the way that we are facing, like how we provide for ourselves, we're gonna feel ready when Mars stations direct. Like, hey, I know what to do, or I feel, at least I feel like I know what I should do, even if I'm not exactly sure. I'm gonna have to move forward with maturity. Mercury conjoining Saturn a few days later at 20 degrees of Pisces, and then we'll aspect Uranus a couple days later at 23, right before the new moon. So yeah, just reflecting what Jamal was saying, like, needing to contend with Saturn. And then once we kind of like fall in line with, okay, this is what I need to do and I'm going to do it correctly, then Uranus will throw us a monkey wrench, a good surprise, a supportive surprise. So it's not all going to be so dreadful. And then we'll have a new start with the new moon at 9 degrees of Pisces.
Of a supportive surprise. That sounds a
Yeah.
lot more encouraging than your life is going to be totally thrown into the wind. Good
Those
luck.
are the best. The sextiles I like even better than trines sometimes, because as we've mentioned, trines can be a lot, overwhelming, like too much. But a sextile is like, here's just what you need.
It really is like a nice little push. And that new moon in Pisces you spoke on at the end, that kind of is the second in our line of random new moons all at 9 degrees in January, February, and March. And the third one is going to be that big eclipse at the end of March. So that's going to be pretty interesting to see how that plays out. But any thoughts on the new moon wrapping up the end of February before we get into the insane month?
I mean, we just have the North Node move into this axis, and now we have our first. Is it the first new moon of this since then?
Yeah, first new moon was
In
in
Pisces, at
Aquarius
least.
at the end.
But it's the first new moon in Pisces
Yes.
since
Did anyone
then.
notice that we don't get solar eclipses in Pisces? I could be mistaken, but we're mostly getting solar eclipses in Virgo, I
Virgo,
believe.
Yeah,
yeah.
we only had the partial back in September.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I thought that was interesting.
That is.
Yeah, so I feel like, this new moon is kind of like the big, grand opening maybe to the energy wise, like, hey, these big changes are coming in. Like, here's what you might need to prepare for emotionally,
Yes, because that one is going to be a big one for
I
sure.
just thought of a joke. So what Alessia was saying, there's no eclipses in Pisces because the universe is like, nope, you already gave away too much of yourself. We don't need to do anything else. You're good. We're gonna
Yeah.
skip you. Next sign, next sign.
I actually think it also might illuminate with that new moon in Pisces. And I know it's not an eclipse, but like sort of what riles you up spiritually and how to pour into yourself spiritually and like your path.
Yeah, because let's be real, the end of this is like mid Pisces season, But like Pisces season is like, how much did I sacrifice myself for others? And people want to say Jesus is a Capricorn, whatever. Jesus was a Pisces. There's no other way that I can imagine it in this lifetime. Sorry. Argue with someone else who's probably more well versed in the subject. I don't know many people that are, but that's okay. The Pisces energy is all about that, like just giving so much and also getting mad about it. Like I have my Ceres and Pisces square my moon, and I give people 3 days of nurture. And on the fourth day, you better have healed yourself because I have no more effort left to give. And it's like sometimes I find myself with Piscean energy living. This will be conjunct my Mercury, so that'll be fun. I find that it's like a fresh start wherever this shows up, this new moon, because I remember this new moon happening one time when I had a situation where I was out late at night with a bunch of people that probably weren't the best to be around, and no one protected me in a situation where I really shouldn't have even been in. But it was hard for my brain to process that I wasn't the one to blame. I like tried to put myself like, no, you were doing this and this and this. And sometimes you just have to admit that like there's outside forces that are impacting you, and it's okay that you didn't have complete control of a situation, because sometimes I think that's what Pisces energy brings too.
That's an interesting anecdote, actually, that you mentioned too, because I guess the thing that I was thinking about with the new moon in Pisces is that I don't think it's that closely aligned with Jupiter. It could, I think it might be like within 10 degrees or something like that, but I don't think it's that close. So there is a square with Jupiter, and Sun square Jupiter is kind of like the overconfidence, or it's kind of like, so over importance or self importance. And then the moon square Jupiter, I always see that as like people who don't follow their intuition right away, and then they're like, oh, I should have did that because I did think to do that thing, but I didn't do it. Right. And then there's the conjunction with Saturn and Neptune in the North Node are kind of in the equation at this point. And I have seen the Saturn North Node transit for some people that are, let's say, in the public eye. I'm not going to say names, but I have seen that as like a karmic reckoning of sorts, right? Saturn on the North Node is kind of like, hey, let's see what you've done on your report cards. Either you've been really, really good. So here you go, is this new status, this new accomplishment, this level up that it seems impossible to achieve for other normal people, or it's like you've been very, very bad. And here's 30 years worth of karma finally coming back around, and everything you've built no longer matters. So I think this new moon with the Pisces stellium that we have going on, it's kind of like, again, a karmic reckoning, because there is no real, like, I think Venus has moved on by this point too. So it's not like we have Jupiter or Venus kind of positively helping whatever this is. There is this sense of like, okay, let's see what you've done collectively. Let's see where you're at. Let's see if you've done good or if you've done bad. And if you've done good, the Saturn North Node with Neptune there is kind of like, again, Saturn Neptune is like that blending of things that seem unrealistic with the hard work and discipline to make things happen. And the new moon is like, let's start something new along this path that we're on.
I love that. And you have such a great way of putting that, because we have so many chances for new beginnings this year. 2025 is a time that there is no shortage of time to act. When there is a lot of eclipse energy, that's not the time to go out and be like, I'm going to start this. Plan it, schedule it, work on it, workshop it, run it past people that you trust or people that you want to work with. But during this time, from March 1st, I know that we're getting a little bit ahead, but like during this time of the new moon in Pisces, it's the last time in February to really take stock and be like, okay, this degree is also like about in the Sabian symbols is pictured. It's also in the workbook, but it's pictured as a jockey outdistancing his rivals, and it's like, who are you really in competition with? And at the end of the day, it's yourself, and that's the only person that you need to be competing with. There's not a damn person on this earth that you are meant to come here and conquer. That is not your purpose, whether you think so or not. And I'm definitely looking forward to the shifting that will happen around that time of February for sure. And with that, we can't just jump into March. I'm down for it if you guys are, because I feel like we are fully going into that train station of, all right, we are into the month that we have been talking about as astrologers for many years, some people for decades, who knows. March 2025 has been known across the board by people who don't even agree with each other on any other subject, but they're like, March 2025 is going to be big. It's real estate agents, it's marketing people, it's spiritualists, it's prophets. They're all seeing this as a big month. So kicking it off, we've got quite a bit of activity.